Welcome to the Let's Actuate podcast interview series, where we speak to leaders in VC, venture building, and future technologies, and we discuss the current state and trajectory of their domains. Let's dive in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Welcome back to the Let's Actuate podcast. We've got an awesome guest for you here. Amish Patel is the founder and managing director of Conduit Venture Labs, which is a startup studio focused on the intersection of the physical and the digital. He's got a really interesting career history and has worked on some extremely innovative projects, but I'm going to hand over the mic so he could tell you all about them. Welcome, Amish. Thank you.
Awesome. Nice to talk again, Andrew. Yeah, I don't know if it's that interesting, but we can give a quick overview. I don't know where you want to start, but like, I'm just a Canadian kid from Toronto. I went to University of Toronto, and go Leafs. Maybe one day we'll win the Stanley Cup. We'll see. But yeah, no backgrounds in computer science and human computer interaction. So Toronto was a really interesting school for neural networks and things like that back in the day. None of us knew why we would ever use that stuff, but apparently it turned out to be important. I remember why am I doing this? I suck at this. Then you realize 20 years later, okay, cool. And so my background was really working on, how humans and computers interact with one another. This is back in early 2000s, mid 2000s. And that's what brought me up to Seattle, where I am today. So, I was working on multi-touch computing and handwriting recognition at a time where, the laptops used to do this. And used to slide pens out, and they used to fingernail to touch stuff on a screen. Windows PC tablet edition, if you remember those things. I ended up here in Seattle, where I still am, and I ended up doing about 10 years at Microsoft, focusing on 0 to 1 products. Microsoft 0 to 1 means 0 to 5 million units, but 0 to 1 products, and really focused, first third of my career on that multi-touch and pen computing. So I worked on things like the snipping tool and OneNote, and just trying to figure out how more than a mouse and a keyboard could be used for interaction. And, it was a struggle until, good old iPhone got announced, and all of a sudden, Hey, this touch thing's really real. And you were sitting there going, yeah, it was. We tried to tell you, but good opportunity. I was a PM. Back then PMs were you had to be technical and do all the things, and worked on bringing Windows multi-touch to Windows and Windows 7, and started working on the first kind of tablets and things like that, and thinking more about not just the UI and how do you make it touchable, but really the hardware and how do you hold it and the ergonomics and things like that. So that got me a little bit into hardware. Ended up moving over to Xbox after that. The team was incubating this little thing called Connect, and computer vision and skeletal tracking and microphone arrays. And so as a person who's just likes thinking about how do humans interact in this thing, it became, instead of a thing you hold and you interact with, it's what do you do at 10 feet in your living room with this sensor that's about gaming and interaction and a lot of dancing and working out in front of your TV. And so I joined that team to think about what the next generation was going to be. So what became Xbox One, and then the Connect 2 platform. So worked on that, worked on how does all the hardware things we use and the digital things come together? So from controllers to headphones to microphones and cameras, and thinking about the whole holistic system. And so created a small team there called Hardware Interaction Design, which was this hybrid between the software team, hardware, industrial design, and how do we bring things together. And,
nice.
And then, lastly, in that part of the career, I worked on wearable technology, and that kind of spurred the next phase of my career. We were incubating, this is back in 2012, remember the Fuel Band, and the Fitbit was a clip. It wasn't a Google thing yet. And Pebble crushed Kickstarter. And there was this watch that had an e-ink display that could do notifications from your phone. And, back then there was no Apple Watch, and the obvious. And so we were incubating health sensors, the PPG sensor, that little green sensor that's underneath a lot of devices. We were working on an iteration of that at Microsoft. And that became Microsoft Band, and the cloud platform became Microsoft Health, which turned to Azure Health. And so that really spurred my background in kind of how do we create sensory hardware software solutions to actually have meaning and impact and change people's lives from a health or fitness or lifestyle perspective. That's the first third. I don't know if
I
that's
love
it.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It definitely is. And thank you. That actually fills a lot of gaps that I had. That's one thing I love about these conversations. You always learn something new. And then you went from corporate to, I believe, based on your LinkedIn, entrepreneur in residence. That jump seems like it's common sense. But what was the tipping point to you saying, let me go try to do this on my own?
Well, so before EIR at Pioneer Square Labs, I founded a company. So co-founded a company. So
There you go.
they're on the LinkedIn, they're a little bit like wonky on the timing.
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure.
but no, so the impetus of starting Catalyst, which is a full body wearable medical
Got it.
device platform, was coming out of Microsoft. So we spent 3 years building Microsoft Band 1 and Band 2, and right around the corner, Apple Watch is coming, and Microsoft's pivoting to cloud and getting at a consumer. And but personally, as a person running design strategy, product, and engineering in that organization, we saw what the future was going to look like
Yep.
from a market perspective. And one of the biggest things in that was strength training and the lack of services. This is a time when it was either figure out to go to the gym and figure it out on your own, or CrossFit. These were like the two big institutions for strength training, and specifically really only catering to those who had the ambition or the access on a very male oriented domain. And so from the Microsoft side, we were like, how do we enter? Like everyone's doing cardio, steps and running and biking,
Mm-hmm.
swimming, but like, how do we really get into the strength place? And so as part of this pivot, personally, like, okay, I was like 10 years at Microsoft. It's time to venture on your own. And I was like, I want to go tackle this problem. And that's where Catalyst was born. And so went
Nice.
from the corporate 0 to 1 to venture 0 to 1. And that's a different formula. I always say it's a little bit easy. It was a little bit easier, honestly. I always say in corporate, like you get a mandate to work on a thing and it's like really, really hard to get the people who told you to do it. And then, but in venture, like if you have a value proposition and a market and a solution and a team, people will gravitate towards supporting that. And so, anyway, Catalyst was born, and we went really deep into how do we use wearable technology in the health medical space, and that really is spurred from, okay, can't do it at Microsoft, gotta do it on my own.
I love that, and it's a really interesting product that you came up with, and I think that would even be fantastic if, and maybe it's just my lack of awareness, something like that, because I'm getting back into fitness myself, was in a closet that I could pull out and kind of track that myself. What ended up happening with Catalyst?
Still out there, man. I
Beautiful.
co-founded that with Bjorn, who's the CEO. Again, I'm the 0 to 2 guy. So,
Yeah.
Raised the seed, got the product through FDA, did it a second time. It was the first ever like 22 channel full body wearable device in that space. At that time it was really different products. And so, and I think we'll continue this conversation. My thing is brand new idea, build a team, hardware software blend, fundraise, get it to market, get it to scalability. And it's still out there. It's raised tens and tens of millions of dollars. It's now an at-home product, so you can have one, order it. And honestly, 8 years later, it's now finding its stride. It takes a while to find one. It's a novel, weird thing, and then it's finding right product market fit. And so, a lot of that learning is why we also built a venture studio. Of we just did it a little bit differently. Maybe we would have got there sooner, right? So, and saved a $20 million, $30 million. So, but it is still out there, and Bjorn is still operating it.
Epic. Awesome. So there was a couple other things that you've brought to market in a similar way, but you were teasing just now at the venture studio and the platform that you've built, and having a better way to bring things like this to market. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, a little context on the synthesis of like why Conduit and where it came from, right?
Yep.
So, after Catalyst, like most founders, they're like, I don't want to do that again for a while. And generally, it's not the product part; it's the fundraising part.
Yeah.
And so, I was coming out of Catalyst, and really good friend at the time, and still to this day, T.A. McCann was joining Pioneer Square Labs, which is a venture studio here in Seattle. They mainly focus on like enterprise SaaS and B2B SaaS. But I was like, what is this venture studio thing? It's 2018, kind of a new concept. And you walk into this door in this room, and there's like all these really badass professionals, like a team of 10 and a bunch of VCs, like coming up with ideas, helping people accelerate. And I think as a first time founder, I don't understand that. I don't understand like cap table and equity and founding and what it's going to take to get there, right? 18 months and one team member at a time, all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden you see a bunch of people who've done it 10 times go, hey, you want to work on it together? And let's go really fast. And so this idea of the venture studio was really interesting. I went and hung out there for a while as like an EIR to explore some D2C products and just kind of like understand, honestly, what the value prop was. But so you take that part. And then I was like, well, I'm not ready to start something again. So let me just go hang out with a bunch of other early stage startups and see if I can kind of be like a CPTO 0 to 1 hardware guy, right? Like continuing to dial in personally, like honestly going, is this my thing? Is this what I'm going to do when I grow up? Right. Like everyone always asks you like, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I was like, I don't know. Can you be the guy who just starts stuff and doesn't finish them? Maybe. So I was like, I don't know if that's like acceptable. I kind of got away with it at Microsoft. It definitely is not acceptable. So I got an intro to a helmet company here in town. It was a University of Washington spin-off of Visis. They were working on Gen 2 product, had raised like $100 million and like really wanted to dial in, how do we think about the head and the brain is very much a concussion mitigation. They are the safest helmets in the world right now. And it really was like, how do we put data to work? How do we create FEM models? And I'm like, great, I love wearables and high precision modeling and all these things around sensory technology. So I went there for a year as a VP of technology and really looked at like, okay, and if you're a wearable or a sensor or health person, the brain is hard. The head is hard. It is not an easy thing to put stuff on in context and measure. So it was a really good experiment again to like, how do I do a bunch of 0 to 1 incubations to see alongside this other existing physical tech product, like physical product, how technology plays in that world. And it was around sensors and health and technology. And then lastly, and I swear I'll get to the point,
is perfect.
The co-founder of Visis, a neurosurgeon here in Seattle at Seattle Children's, is also like an entrepreneur. The guy is lots of companies. And so he and a few others were incubating a company called Proprio, which is out there still. And they were trying to take robotics, computer vision, multi-fusion computer vision, so different types of vision platforms, AR, VR, and map it to the surgical space, specifically interoperative spinal and cranial surgery, so spinal fusion. And so I was like, well, that's cool. Like, I've never done that before. At the same time, I'm like, hey, time to upskill. This wearable thing is kind of a commodity. Like, Amish, you got to figure out what you're going to do when you're 40, right? And so, like, ended up going to Proprio. And again, this thesis of like, okay, what have I amassed over the years as a reputation or as a skill set? I'm a software plus hardware guy. I think software architecture is powered by hardware. I've understood how to manufacture and deploy and scale because Microsoft and others have like really exposed me to this world. But we created a network, between, if you go out there and throw a stick at other hardware founders, we're all going to know each other at least by 1 degree of separation. There aren't that many of us out there. We've all gone through the same struggles and the scars are just a little bit different. And I always think there's like empathy in hardware folks because we also think a little bit differently about career. We think about iterations, products, deployments. Like it's a big deployment. It's not just every 2 weeks you're updating something, but once you do a product, you maybe want to move to the next one or next architecture. So we're always moving around. And so Proprio was a great opportunity for me to go in and say, look, I don't really want to know if I want to stay here that long, but like, I really want to figure out how to build this thing from idea to Series A to idea to FDA, idea to market. And it was the most complicated, craziest thing I've ever worked on, right? You're talking about like micron precision of putting a screw into someone's spine and doing that with modern UX, 3D rendering, Unity, like all these other things I've never been done before. And so it was a trip and during the pandemic. So it was also just like, how do we build an engineering team that builds hardware during the pandemic? So Gabe, the CEO, he was, a new CEO, but super intelligent, right? Super smart, had a vision and a strategy. And I was like, how do I bring my crew to this? How do I bring my friend who's like, go-to-market hardware person, a hardware manufacturing lead. And like, we've built this network. Like, what if this was a thing where we came in as like the SWAT team, 0 to 2, 0 to 1 team. And that's where Conduit was born in my head, right? Which was this idea of the venture studio being an institutional co-founder from 0 to 1. How do we accelerate it, de-risk it, validate it, fund it, spin it out? Wait, like, okay, well, I think like in the hardware space, like, where do we go? I was like, where do I go? If I have my next idea, I couldn't find one. And that's how it came about. I was like, okay, I like it. I would totally trade off equity for the acceleration. And I couldn't find it, literally couldn't find a studio of commodity hardware, computer vision, sensory technology, plus AI ML SaaS kind of models, or, powering software.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Conduit Venture Labs was really birthed.
Epic. And when you first started Conduit, from this observation of a gap to where it's at today, how long have you been around now?
For me, I've been around 2 years. For us, it's been a year. So,
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So over the past year to 2 years, as that has evolved, what has the shifting of the sands looked like as it's settled?
Yeah, I think for me, again, it became two things early on, which was, should we exist? Can I just run the studio through the studio mindset, right?
Yep.
If I have a value proposition that this is something that other founders are going to want, let me go validate it. And I chose two vectors, right? One was, let me understand where investment dollars are going, right? Where's venture? Where's hardware tech? Where's hard tech going in general? And does my hypothesis around some of these technologies being commoditized actually make them more investable, right, than they were before? This is before AI even kicked off. It, I think, amplified our thesis a little bit more. So one was that. And so it was really going out and seeing what the big trends were. And I think health tech was already an emerging trend. Quantified self was kind of its thing. We were trying to take it to the next level. I think computer vision validated that there's YOLO, and these models were starting to come out and things we could do with it. But climate tech was the other big impetus for us. So as a person who always worked on health or professional tools or impact related products, personally, I was hearing this buzz over the last couple of years around climate technologies, regulatory change, Article 9 in Europe, and these big initiatives. And that was very familiar from my Microsoft days, which was whoa, all the interesting proprietary data, all the things that are going to drive behavior change in this space is about quantifying the real world in some capacity, making understanding of what we call it, making the invisible visible, right? And then doing something intelligent with AI or ML or whatever to drive value, right? And so I was like, holy shit, this is the formula over again, right? And so I was like, okay, let's start with that. So we dug into that side. And on the other end, it was really about what we call the Conduit Fellows Network now. I went around, and I think every hardware or physical tech founder knows there's two variables that matter more as an early stage team that I think the software guys need, right? Which is who your crew is and who picks up the phone. And that is who's your friend who's the former director of EE for Microsoft Surface that's going to validate that you're doing it right over the weekend. Right. And hardware people will lean in because they always want to look at the next object that they want to they always want to volunteer to mentor or advise. Right. And then two, fortunately, you usually see folks from corporate going to entrepreneurship in the hardware space generally accelerate their ability to raise a pre-seed and seed because they have relationships in manufacturing, supply chain. Right. And so a startup goes to a CM and says, hey, I want to build 100 units. First of all, that's the wrong call to make. And two, why would I take the risk on doing all this work for you? But we, as a community of people who've either done it before or come from executives, et cetera, in corporate, have these relationships. We have it is a relationship based business. And so I went about and said, could I get my gang together, and would they all volunteer 4 hours a quarter and be a mentor, an advisor, an ideator, financier, or something if we created companies as a portfolio? And there's now 167 of us around the world. Epic. Right? So these are my two early signals to say, if I can get these things right, then I'm assuming that if we create a portfolio of companies that are high impact, high return in health and we call them human and planetary health and performance, do I have the support system to make it the economics of my building similar to that of a SaaS studio? That is our 5-year hypothesis, is that we can get it in the window by leveraging partnership, by leveraging the community to de-risk execution, but also give us access to the things that are generally more capital intensive.
That's a tight window.
We're going to do it. It's I'm all about it's, spite and ambition. It's everyone being that's never going to work. I'm great. I'm going to go try that. Right.
Yeah,
Let's get after it. Yeah.
I love that. And how do you see this the evolution of your studio taking place? And I know that you've kind of validated your hypotheses as this has evolved a bit, and now you're in the point, I would assume, of going heads down, being really tactical on those first few validation points and compressing that window of time to market, cost to validation, and things like that.
Yeah, it's well, I have a phenomenal head of studio. So like Adeline is like the antithesis to my anti-detail detail. So it's like it's really good. And she comes from like years of building at these BCG and learning these tools and processes. So yeah, like right now we are in heads down Portco building mode and validating some of our key assumptions. So we've built like strong infrastructure internally. Our gate system's strong. Like we have a lot of Lego pieces here, right? It's not just a simple SaaS thing. It's like, okay, we need a hardware de-risking and execution platform. We need to build the first version of this. Like, how do you take an idea through all the little modules at the right time to go build a hardware venture? And it's a hardware and a software venture. So like Susan Paley is my partner on that side of the fence. And she comes from like massive scale execution from Beats by Dre and all these other places. So she brings her network of, okay, like how do we build the POC? How do we get this things done? Right. Like I would always, if I ever needed to do another startup, I would just call her. Right. So like, how do I bring that practice? So,
Nice.
we've really spent time in year one, like building out core playbooks and then starting to, now we're like hammering on them. Right. We've done 2 portcos that are still in stealth that are now in pre-seed and raising, and they're have pilots deployed. Right.
Nice.
One's computer vision, one's in the generative AI, like it's actually from our loneliness vector. In our human health sector. We have 2 more in the pipeline and 16 in the backlog. And we're like 5 founder in residences in. And so a lot of it is like, what kind of founder profiles we're looking for, what kind of team. So with hardware teams, it's the different org chart. It's okay, how long do we play as a studio? I think Conduit as a studio is going to play longer than most studios do. We don't want to, dilution of our founder stock is really important to our portfolio strategy too, right? Yeah. So like how we, some studios are like, great, you raised your round. Great, I'm a board member, peace. Like, call me if you need me. I'll help you with talent, right? Mm-hmm. Great. Like, but that makes sense for their strategy. For us, it's, hey, the riskiest thing in this business is going to be probably the hardware execution from Series A to Series B, right? From seed plus onward. Yep. We have the networking capability to de-risk that substantially. So we're going to continue to play a role inside of this operating company, not just as like a board seat and a person who's there to guide, but like we're going to deploy our fellows and our team and our stuff and get in there. And we're testing that out now. We're so early in our incubations and like our first spin outs. But this first fund of ours is like scopes. There's like, let's go build 10 companies. Let's build them across the architectures that we think are our architectures, right? Like we scope really specifically what technical architectures we want to have reusability on. So computer vision and IoT and wear tech and smart devices. Like, okay, what profile of those will we invest in? Not just like any hardware device, but no, like what's the supply chain profile look like for a company that we would go create? These are the types of questions we think about because it's those risks that actually on one end hurt the companies, and 2, at the end of the day, we're also a fund and a portfolio. We need to think about the return profile.
Yeah. Epic. And being one of the few hardware venture studios in the space, but having done this before, not just yourself, but obviously everybody in your network, and curating that together. What does that feel like now? And what do you think that space is going to look like beyond Conduit over the course of even the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah. So, unpack as you please.
Yeah, no, I think one, let's just talk about venture studios or startup studios as a whole, and then how we relate to that from a hardware perspective. I think we've seen an emergence of startup studios, right? Or venture studios. Like there are, I think, 800 plus globally accounted for on Enhance's current website, right? So like there's a lot. And when I asked the database lords who have all that, like, tell me how many are working on physical tech / climate tech, we're talking climate tech sub 10%, and we're talking about less than 2% or 1% focused on physical tech. That doesn't make sense to me. So it's like, I get why, just proportionally from an investability, venture dollars, number of hardware founders, just Okay, so how many are doing their own thing versus how many are going to go into an institution? And so I think like that's one thing. But if the fundamental thesis I have is more investment dollars are going to move into physical tech, one, because how AI is commoditizing software development, things like that from a capital intensity perspective. But two, if we're really going to solve real world problems, we're probably going to need some sort of real world catalyst, right? So like,
Physical infrastructure.
okay, and that's probably a sensor or a camera or something physical, maybe not, right? Or sat data is not going to solve all problems. We need to think about ground truth and other things, right? So that's one hypothesis, and I think you'll see more and more hardware venture studios like ours emerge, but I don't think it's going to be tens and tens at a time because there aren't that many of us out there. So it just comes down to like also strategically why like our fellows, what we want to build at Conduit is we haven't, I think about scale all the time, right? I'm a product guy who thinks about scale of architecture. So like we are architected our playbook, our processes, our teams, and our partnerships and our playbooks such that we know that two things are true. Like one is our founders for our next ag tech company isn't sitting in Seattle and San Francisco. They're sitting out in Wisconsin right now, and they just did a PhD at the University of Wisconsin about like the use. There's a paper I'm reading right now, right, which is like how computer vision can be used to detect lameness in cattle herds and reduce costs by like 30%, right? Like massive forecasting platform.
Epic.
There's no, if you pretend you're an entrepreneur in San Francisco and you did SaaS and that's going to be you're going to be that founder. Okay, maybe founder 2 or 3, but not the person with the passion and the knowledge and the background, right? The pain. And so we know we have to be modular. And it's not very true to most studios where we want to create common infrastructure, common practices, but do smaller sized company creation funds, focus on specific verticals that like take our playbook and extend them into these ecosystems. And that could be domestically or internationally. How do I take like our 167 hardware founders, executives, manufacturers, and supply chain experts, et cetera, and give that power to someone in Dubai, in London, in Paris, in Wisconsin, Albuquerque, to go focus on what is a generic process and playbook and mindset of execution, but then against a specific set of technologies and problems. And so that's what we're looking at now is like, even though Studio One and core studios, like we're just getting off the ground and, that fund is almost closed and we're already looking at like, okay, the built world, that is a massive location. That's where we want to go and take our core skill set, because that's where we're seeing the massive amount of pressure of where technology can enhance labor, efficiency, energy use, like all these other things. Yeah. So it was like, great. We saw what happened in Law 97 in New York. Okay, what does Conduit New York look like? How do I take 2 of my fellows in my network who are badasses and go make them the managing directors of those studios and help them empower them to go build a portfolio of 10 companies, like solving problems in that space? How do I take these robotics folks I have on my network and help them have a studio to like, at the end of the day, like what T.A. McCann from PSL like always told me is like, how do you scale yourself? How do you scale your skills? How do you scale your network? And that is our focus on the venture studio landscape, is like, if we can get the right partners and efficiencies on board, we could scale Conduit to help build physical real world technologies where they matter where they matter the most, right? Where experimentation is fast with the right corporate customers, like we and I say lastly in this rant, like where SaaS is different from hardware is we care about pilots, right? Like sometimes it's like, hey, get the pilot SaaS service up and get a credit card, right? Like convert, and then use different go-to-market techniques. In our case, it's it might be a whole year pilot in the ag industry with a strategic partner, right? And that validates something else. So it also becomes about how do we reduce path to experimentation and cost of experimentation through partnership. And that might mean giving away a little bit more on the equity. That might be splitting the bill a little bit differently. But like, we just have to think differently if we want more real world tech. That's just like the hypothesis.
And I would imagine, especially with the hard tech, that's a great risk mitigation strategy, because once you get over that hump, you're clear for a good portion of the next short, long term, right?
The nice thing is like hardware plus software has better moats generally in the short term, in the early stage, because again, how many people are going to go after it? And there's some IP-ness you can tie to it more than you can software alone. And then 2, pilot customers are generally at the enterprise level, and it gives you your first like tranche of ICP revenue generation. And then honestly, like a lot of our portfolio strategy isn't IPOs, right? Like a lot of hard tech companies that are doing real world tech are going M&A to private equity, to corporate, right? Like
Yep.
how do I build the next company for John Deere? How do I
Yep.
build the next company for Car Hill? How do I
Yep.
think about their innovation strategy and where venture can play and help them, right? So like these corporate venture studio models or partnerships through pilots are very, very important to us because one, those are the real world tech companies. And two, it's a better together story. We're fast, cheap, efficient, and we can help them get where they need to be and they can scale it, right? We don't need to scale to like a billion users on a SaaS platform. It's actually no, the better scaler is the industry incumbent or the leader, right?
And what does that relationship look like between a studio that would be spun up with a couple of MDs in a particular place around a problem space versus in partnership with a corporate? I would imagine there's a couple different dynamics that might take.
Yeah, you can look at it as threefold for us. Like how do we create, we originate companies, right? We create companies. Like one is we do them through our fund and we do them ourselves and we spin them out and we do the normal route, right? And that's the core of the business. We also know that the tool that we've built is very valuable to corporate innovation or corporate venture capital, right?
Yep.
So it's, hey, we are a corporate that lives in that world. And I think there's two ways to participate. One is you put together a small fund of people in that domain, and they might be complementary partners. They might be like, let's say the built world. Hey, like we could take a commercial real estate developer, just someone who operates buildings and put them in a micro fund and say, look, we're all in the same ecosystem. We care about this thing as a whole. And they act as LPs and we go co-create companies together and they act as LPs into that fund and that relationship. The other is, I think what we're seeing a lot of, which is corporates going, hey, like my innovation budget's this big, I could spend a few $1,000,000 with a venture studio and actually I can get away with more innovation because it's not under our brand and our legal and all these other things. And I can go and experiment in the market where I think my next, I hired McKinsey to do this $2 million report, but I don't know how to go and experiment in those spaces, right? So like maybe you want to leverage us as a platform to go do the ideation, the validation, the experimentation, and let's split the equity in those companies. You can fund them, we can split the common, but really like we're co-building these companies to you, and either they can be acquired back and become part of your innovation or a new P&L in your business, or we can spin them out and now you have a stake in how they're doing in the market and validating those vectors. So we want to play in all three. Right now we're heads down focused on fund one and building and getting cycles. We're finding product market fit and MVP with our MVP studio, right? Like we run the studio through the studio mindset. So we are in pilot mode and we're going to go build 10 companies and see if we can get, like you said earlier, the burn rate, the capital efficiency, how can we make that such that these pre-seed companies are investable and highly desirable investments?
Epic. I love it. And then one thing that I was interested in, so you've been talking about playbooks a lot, and it kind of to a similar thing before we go like into the weeds on what playbooks look like for you. I made a note of like these managing directors, you put your couple of experts in a problem space or in a particular location, spin up a new studio around it. What does the translation look like between a process and a concept that you've documented and individuals that may or may not be familiar to the execution of those things, actually absorbing those principles and embodying the playbooks as they're executed versus just being words on a page in a framework on a computer?
It's a great question, and everyone handles it differently. I would say like up until starting Conduit and honestly like finding Adeline in the world, who's our head of studio, and her coming from a more process driven place, we just wing that stuff as a founders, man. You do 100 things, you figure it out, you just get it done. And
sounds about right. Yeah.
You just like backwards engineer a pitch deck and you realize like you're always product and vision heavy and you don't really do any validation. And like, these are the common pitfalls, right? Yep. I think like we are very strong on process. Like Notion we've built out infrastructure that's database driven, right? So like in Notion, we run a 4-gate system as our methodology. We have we have an archetype called the company creation cube is how we like illustrate it. Each cube is broken up into like 16 squares and each square is focused on in a different like intensity during each phase of our playbook. So from market research to trends to foresight into, is this a problem we're solving, and how are we calculating TAMs from bottom up, top down? So we have this cube. Each cube has a bunch of tools in it, and we're really just trying to find signal. And so when a founder in residence come with us, like a project book is created in Notion, and it's entirely like 3-dimensional database with a front end, right? And in it is all the questions we want to answer at each phase. And those questions, first phase 1 is like 2 weeks sprint, and we're going to go answer these 10 questions. And here's some tools that we've created in Miro or industry tools, or here's some fellows to talk to. And we want to then take all their input and synthesize it into a point of view. And we run a gate, and then the investment committee is us internally. We bring in some experts and say, okay, let's pressure test this assumption. And as we go through this process, things need to get stronger and et cetera, et cetera. But like we now expand more and more and more. Okay. So if we're going to go build something in the rainwater management space, for instance, a project we're doing, okay, what's the technical architecture? And so we literally have a database of all the tools or tasks or assets or artifacts you can create, storyboard, business card,
Sure.
one page PRD, technical architecture diagram. And we make those not only from our expertise, but with our engineering partners, with our fellows. And we kind of synthesizing, like, if 10 founders were going to do this task, how are they all doing it differently when they were coming up with their idea? Let's put this in the toolbox. Now, as a founder, you're say like, hey, this week you're going to work with Amish and Adeline and Vlasta, and we're going to go talk about product. Okay, great. Not only do we have a process for like making sure we're checking the boxes, but we have tools and things that they can use or learn, but it's all very much there. And you can just say like, cool, I want to use that thing. I don't want to use that thing. We do know for this project architecture, we don't need it. We do need it. And so we're at a point where all these playbooks, hardware, design, product, market, fundability, are all one mapped to like, what do we need to do at each stage? And it's very simple to be like, look, here's the list. Here are the questions we're going to go answer. We're going to ask of the founder. Either the founder's me and it's an internal project, or a founder in residence who's come in. And it's very well like documented. And then it's like, let's talk about why we're asking these questions. And I think for some founders, they're like, why are we doing this work now? And you're like, hey, on the hardware side, we're doing this now because this is actually going to tell us if we should just give up now. There is no like on, week 4, 1-page supply chain analysis and financial forecasting. What founders do that on week 4 of their idea? We do. Right? Susan comes in with a few fellows and goes, look, if you're really going to make like that thing, that part, okay, let's just go into that with our heads up. Let's turn it red in the playbook. Let's put it into the inventory. Let's make sure we track, like we're going to de-risk that. And so we know that even for our ventures, there's just a much more parallel path with hardware, software, venture, all of it, that we need to track it. So our playbooks are like database driven, but tools driven. And then we just like deploy which tool, and a tool equals like an asset, a signal, a synthesis of a point of view, an expert, a network, and a partner. And like all those things are available. And as we go on, we just build that out in our ecosystem. So like, okay, you have a concept. We have an architecture. You're going to go talk to the guys at C-Comp who are going to do the first 100 units at manufacturing 2 years from now when we actually raise like $5 million. Talk to them now, right? Like, how much is it going to cost? So it really comes down to like playbooks for us have to keep us sane, because with the number of projects we're doing simultaneously, there's no structure. We're going to end up with like random different designs and opinions. And we as a team need to own like the consistency there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And especially in this space, timelines and sourcing can be a kryptonite to project for sure.
It's also transparency, right? Like most people go and raise a pre-seed and a seed and they're like, I got a prototype. And then generally what happened in the past was like Susan, myself, or one of our fellows become advisors to this company, and then to get 9 different opinions on like how to go execute which manufacturer, which supply chain. The question is, can we synthesize that and have a single point of view and then attach the resources behind it? So like we're all, and then from a VC perspective or an investor perspective, like, to know we have a plan for a plan and the team that has access to go execute on it. This is why Conduit, right? This is the hypothesis of like, if this doesn't work, then okay, then it is harder. It's like, but if I'm a founder who's like, man, I really want to create a AI company for the real world, but hardware is the thing that I just don't know, so I'm not going to do it. And I know it never gets funded. We have to be your hardware co-founder as a studio and like if that hypothesis isn't helpful to the market, then we'll die and we'll move on, right? So like, like our product is hardware as a co-founder,
Yep.
as a venture studio, and we're just testing that product market fit, honestly.
Nice. And you mentioned that, and we take this approach to the co-founder in a box is what we say, but those founding partners and longer timelines of support. Um, what do the actual financial breakdowns look like of that, since you're going to be with them for the longer term, and how do you make that viable and scalable?
I don't know yet. We're running the experiment right now. I think we have a
Cool.
hypothesis on
Yep.
so we know we've done enough cycles now to understand like generally how much are we spending to get the company to first
Perfect.
check and formation, right? And we know we're roughly going to put in from a time, materials, assets, prototyping, etc., anywhere from like 180 to $280,000.
Yeah, sounds
like,
about right.
okay, cool. But it matters like, is it software? Is it IoT? Is it like computer vision where we're just buying cameras? Like these things will change it. But fundamentally, like 250K is like our target for like, is there a company worth creating? Do we have the team? Did we validate and de-risk some of the early stage prototypes? Is there a pilot and path to first revenue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right?
Yep.
Now we're literally in the middle of, okay, so now that they're a company, but they're still in the studio and they haven't closed the seed round or haven't closed the institutional round, we're in. We're like, I'm still designing, I'm in Figma, I'm in like doing things all day long, which is great because that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's assume they close the round and we continue to be there as the hardware de-risking engine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know the answer, but I think it's going to be a couple 100K more over time, split between us, um, potentially cross-charging the portco, but I don't want to do that. I want us to earn our keep and earn our value in the equity. I know a lot of people who do that, and so it's
Yep.
like it's up to us to decide how that works. But also putting our fellows to work, giving them opportunities to work with these companies, guide these companies, consult for these companies, and that's a lot of folks in hardware who are in their like let's call it third phase of their careers have mini
Mm-hmm.
consultancies, like two-person shops doing hardware go to market, hardware design, hardware engineering, hardware strategy for supply chain. Those are a lot of fellows now. How do I put them to work, right?
Mm.
And so we're great. Let's just put like I'm not going to name the names, but like that GTM
Yep.
company friend of ours
Yep.
to work, and like great, it helps everybody, helps the CEO,
Yep.
helps the company, and so
Yep.
again through partnership is how
Yep.
we want to have like cheap aligned assets for the company to execute on. So then we know like when we do drop off, they got all the resources they need, and we're just there to guide.
Beautiful. I love that. And while you're going through this, I know you're in it, and I know you're validating. What are some of the pains, needs, and gaps that you've experienced somewhat recently, or that you're anticipating in the somewhat near term?
I mean, do we want to say the obvious? Capital.
Yeah.
But I think it's more about I think we started Conduit right at the right time. A little early, but perfect. It's good to be early and then hit the
Oh
window.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
think we're at a point where more allocators are thinking about this space.
Yep.
I think they're learning more about what it takes to actually mean to build like a climate adaptation company. Right. It's not everything's a mitigation company and there's this whole other space. I think capital is going to start coming from corporates as well because they're seeing how they play in the digital twin space, for instance, and how does metrology and sensors go into that space. So I think capital is tight right now, and it's been tight for us, but it's like we're operators, we know how to make it work. But it's not just necessarily on the funding of the company creation side; it's also just making sure the spinouts have the right ramp and on ramp to go.
Yeah.
So we maintain a network of partners on the VC sides, and to make sure we have that network ready to go
Yep.
when things are ready to turn the tap on, right, and not doing it too early. The other side is I thought it would be founders. The biggest thing is always like finding the right talent for your companies. I think right now we're only
Yeah.
doing four a year as a target. Maybe
Okay.
that is harder when we're doing 10, 12 a year and we have multi studios. But I think early on we were, I was really concerned that as a new studio that doesn't have a big portfolio, that's working in a weird space, that we wouldn't find repeat entrepreneurs who generally understand the value proposition more than anybody else. Um, would be there, and I was wrong. I was like completely wrong. And
Mm.
I think the early signal for me is we at Conduit are very empathy based, and I think Like, and what I mean by that is I think most hardware builders are empathy based. It's just like a, hey, we've all taken those beatings and we've taken them harder and different on all the vectors: capital, building, execution, supply chain, manufacturing, go to market, like all the things. So there's scars there. When you all show each other your scars on your arm, you're like, cool. And I also think that's why the Conduit Fellows all showed up, because it's like, I want to pay it forward because I remember the pain. And that's just a different vibe in venture and SaaS and all these other places that just software alone, right?
Yep.
And then the founder side of it was like, oh man, there are a lot of second, third time founders, or fourth or fifth. We have a person who's in their fourth now.
Nice.
That want to work on impact problems. They want to work on climate. They want to work on health. And they're a generation of entrepreneurs from like 2000 to 2020 who are now in this next phase. And they're going, okay, so I built that mobile company and I did that web one company and I did that social media company. And now I want to go do something else. And that was not anticipated. And so when you like then do the breakdown of, don't want to do it alone. I might want to do something with hardware. So who's going to help me do that? And who's focusing on like health and climate? Like I'm hoping, and the hypothesis, we're in that window of a value proposition that's valuable to people. That say, look, there's a whole crew here. We're all operators, and maybe like we say, entrepreneurship should be a team sport. Like maybe this is a way to do it. That's kind of our theme.
Yeah, I love that. And venture studios usually have been known to take heat on the higher ownership levels. Where do you all sit on that spectrum? And especially with these longer timeline relationships, how have you found that being received from this community?
Well, we've got an hour to talk about this, but let's talk about just our perspective. I think it's fun. It's a crazy world.
Yeah,
all the studios are trying to figure it out right now. And I think allocators are also trying to figure out the risk reward profile of the cap tables.
Yeah.
I think
that's why I wanted to touch on it a bit.
Yeah. My perspective is you see those taking 80 and some taking 20. And I think it all comes down to what is the value proposition? What is the value that's created for that equity exchange? And I think more importantly, what's the ongoing value for that equity exchange?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people are like, hey, I helped you get there and it's a 6-month deal and I even $250K and great. Like, okay, bye. And you're like, whoa, but you hold a lot of the cap table, which is also part of the option pool and could be a for employee. So what is the ongoing relationship? So I think for us, it's like, look, we take sub 40, right? So 40 or less. We try to break that value prop into the creation side, which is can our network and our process and our playbook and all the things help validate something that's fundable, product design, et cetera, et cetera. Traditional studio value proposition. I think we add a plus side beside that and say, is there value in being your hardware co-founder? Right. And say, if we combine these two things for what is traditionally an equity stake for just a software co-founder, right? And I don't say just, but like we do both. We have to do the hardware and the software. Everyone thinks hardware is just hardware. It's like, no, we have to build a SaaS platform and a pipeline and IoT and connectivity and RF and all these other things. Like it's a one more complicated stack. It has regulatory and compliance, all these other things to take into consideration. And we think that like there might be a reckoning on some of the studios right now, just because AI has helped small teams go do more faster. And outside of capital and maybe mentorship and advice, business model advice specifically, and business model like strategy, 40, 50, 60 is a lot, right? So, and I think if I was now on the allocator side in a pre-seed, seed, series A, I'd say, well, what are you doing after the seed round closes? And I think we are hoping to say, well, we're the team that's still architecting the supply chain and helping open the door for the manufacturer. And the reason the manufacturer is taking our small MQO order is not, they never wouldn't take because of this, they wouldn't take a startup MQO, is because it's coming from Susan and David and a few others and saying, well, hey, if you guys trust that this thing's going to make it, I'm more likely to do it. And that is the relationship of a hardware manufacturer and a go-to-market distribution channel, right? Like on our side, that's the bigger risk. So we know we have to like create value up front, but that we have to create value long-term because all of us know like it's V2 that's going to kill your startup, not V1, right? It's like, so it can't just be, we'll get you to V1 and buy, right? And so I think we're going to test that economic efficiency model, but if we can still do it cheaper than the 10 comps of startups, cheaper, faster, with less risk than the startups doing it on their own, then we still have a value proposition. And I think that model will be under the gun for some software folks. And I think the last part, just to add to it, is we're a studio of operators and we don't have a sidecar fund. We work in partnership to design those cap tables of our companies when they spin up, such that it's a cap table that's strategic for this hardware venture. It might need a customer on it because a lot of our customers have funds because they're big pilots. And, each one is going to be bespoke to the strategy of, okay, what does the seed round look like for this company and why? And more important, if some venture studios, they take the other approach. Their studio is an extension of their fund, right? And their fund is the actual strategy, and the studio is a way to get more shots on net with higher ownership. And it's about I can double dip I can be on the common and the preferred, and I'll be the first check in. Now the positive thing there is, yeah, if you have an idea, you have pre-seed angel capital, 350K, good, done, right? So yeah, we have to make that part of our playbook. 3 months before we're going to start something, we start validating, can we get that 350 in? It's like, what would a startup founder do? That's what we have to go to. So we know that's a down on us, right? Which is we don't have a giant fund to go and do that. But at the same time, I don't know. We've talked about this, Andrew. Like, if you're a successful founder and you raise your Series A or your Series B or bridge round, especially in hardware, bridge round,
Yep.
on day one on formation, it's me and the studio and we're co-founders and we're doing it together. Yeah, we split the common. Cool. We got some investors. Let's go do it. What if I'm successful and you have money on the preferred and you probably own, like some studios, 50 on the common, another 8% on your safe note and pro rata rights and whatever. One, is there room for anybody else in the preferred to play when you fundamentally own 60% of this company, if not more, at the seed round? So who wants to play with us? And then two, like, I'm doing well. And now I want to go raise a big institutional round. Like, who's showing up at the board meeting with me? Is it that co-founder buddy of mine who cares about this? Or is it the person on the preferred side? And like, if you know the game, that like the capital and your role as a founder to, how you protect the common and do these things, like how dilution works, like it's really important to know early on, like, who am I playing with? And I think a lot of funds who have studios are really good at getting you to build a company with them, which is great. And they're probably more successful at launching them than we are going to be. So we'll do less instead of more. But are they staying on longer as value? And if they're sitting on your preferred as well, with pro rata or super pro rata rights, like, what happens at the Series B when you crush it and they're now negotiating against squashing their own common equity? They don't care about their common anymore. And I think this is a one that's going to play out in the next 5 years. Of now that we've seen like Fund 1 and Fund 2, a lot of studios come out. Where are they? What do they look like? And are they fundable? And how are the founders doing? And I think, like, again, we have a position of being operator only. Like, we're going to sit on the common with you, ride or die till the end, which means I need to protect that for my LPs, which means I have to stay involved a little longer. And I think that might be an approach that's more operator forward than it is allocator forward. And that's my hypothesis, again, just an opinion. But like, okay, I'd take that bet. We're all betters. All the operators are crazy founders, right? So it's like, I'll take the bet. I'll get in bed with that. But I think these next 5 years are going to be fun to see.
Yeah, but the really strong thing about that bet is it's a proven bet based on your own rap sheet track record and your familiarity and those that you've worked with before, this network that you built as well. So it's pretty mitigated bet.
We hope so. And I think, like, especially in the hardware space, if you ask some of the big deep tech funds or hard tech funds, like, they're betting on the person, right? Like, yes, there's the market and everything else, but like when it comes to like some of this highly scientific deep tech or hard tech or hardware, it's like, I know that like a $5 million bridge can be mitigated if that expert is the one looking at it or has access to something. And that's substantial for early stage companies. And I think like hardware investors understand that, software investors don't. But the question is like, my goal, how do I get more software investors to invest in software that's powered by hardware so that the risk is just one notch higher than it was before, right?
Yeah. And do you what is your experience been in that translation and that storytelling so far?
It's a journey. It's a journey for sure. I think, at the end of the day, the proof is in just execution. So like, look, know we exist, know we have a thesis, know we're open for anybody to come and fund our companies and hang out. We don't care. As long as you care about our thesis, you are a good player on our cap table strategy. but we want team members, and like that's how we think. So I
Nice.
don't know, man. Let's do this in 18 months, and I'll tell you how it's going. How it's
Cool.
going.
Yeah, no, we'll do periodic check-ins. I'm really interested to see how the trajectory looks, and I know that we've talked about. So here at Actuate, we're really early in this. Chris and I are executors from problem
Yeah,
solving side, and then our two other GPs are ex executives as well, with their own experience in the world of startup and venture, but venture building coming together. We have our hypothesis of what those playbooks are. So it's nice to be a part of a community like this, where it's like, no, we're all going through this together, especially in this deep tech, hard tech space where a hard is always hard when it comes to startups, but this is a little bit harder.
yeah. You guys are taking on the next level conversation, which I'm excited to contribute. Whatever we can help you guys do, you're taking that next leap, which is awesome. Like we need more people to do that.
Oh, for sure, for sure, and we'll definitely be watching you all closely as well. And I appreciate that any value that we can add to you, which grain of salt, but I appreciate the value that you add to us in conversation and the perspective that you bring. Because being able to hop and skip, and this is the value of having that community, right? Like the ecosystem that you've built out, and one of the assumptions that we had when building this out, we focus on community first, right? We
Yeah.
focused on infrastructure first. So it was really nice to have that assumption validated. That problem solving in general kind of happens the same everywhere.
Yeah.
That it's always people first and bringing people around a particular problem space to really deeply understand it before you go to solve it. But yeah, I'd love to do some check-ins every 6 to
Always.
12 months to see how you all evolve and follow your story.
I would say like to that point, like of the year before Conduit was like a thing, right? It was a
Mm-hmm.
thing in my head, and I was going serving the market. The venture studio community is freaking awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Like it is different from the allocator side where I spent a hot minute. And then
Mm,
like the startup side is always like, oh, founders are nice to founders, but everyone's heads down doing their own thing, and there's some might be competition or not. So like, there's a camaraderie, but not necessarily a community with
mm,
founders. The venture studio community has been freaking phenomenal globally, right? Like I traveled all the countries and found the studios and the studio heads, and everyone has a unique perspective of why they're doing it.
yep,
But it does generally lead from some sort of empathetic thing. They're all trying to scale themselves or their network or their community. They're trying to synthesize wisdom. They're trying to put that wisdom to work. And everybody I have met has shared. Like, there isn't a studio in the world that's like, this is how we do it. This is our playbook. We actually do research like this. This is who we call. Like, it's been so phenomenal to get Conduit off the ground, and only because like in a year how fast we've come in our tooling and our playbooks. Like, yes, we are uniquely building the hardware one, that's
mm-hmm,
us, but that's for us to share then to somebody else, right? It's been phenomenal how like the company creation kind of asset class has come together and say, hey, we don't really know how we're doing this, but we're all thinking about doing this. There's some models that are working, some that are not, and it feels really nice. It's like the early days of something, which feels like
yeah.
we're all just figuring out what the norm is going to be. But it's also been the challenge from a fundraising perspective is there's no norm. But at the same time, the community has been phenomenal. All the studio heads have been amazing.
And I think you're right on that point. When while it's new, we're at the other side of the threshold, where it's new but starting to become familiarized, starting to become recognized, starting to become sought after by allocators as well, because the value is clicking. There is proof from the prior 10 years that this has been starting to be scaled out from some of these other very early studios. So I'm glad that we're in this early but not too early so
Yeah.
that we can meet that window phase. Yeah. So I'd love to wrap up with a couple of thoughts and considerations that you might pass along. One to other individuals and builders that are trying to do something similar in their own space or maybe in this space as well. What are some considerations or thoughts for either other founders or participants in the venture building space that you might have?
Yeah. I think like The nice thing about the studio or building space is like you have to treat it just like you're building any company. And so, like, who's your like? If you're taking a unique angle, if I want to start a studio or I want to join a studio, or it's still an entrepreneurial mindset. And to really think like how we think about it is like who are the first five for every little, we call them outposts, these outpost strategy we want to have, right? So like who are the first five for the one in the built world? Who are the first five for the Portco? Who are the first five for blah? And I think it's the same thing of like, one, where do you fall in the first five, right? And so everyone's like, okay, am I the CEO? Am I good at strategy? Am I good at fundraising? Right? Hey, I'm going to need a Susan who's just like the hardware execution, like beast of the industry, right? Okay, I'm going to need Adeline who just knows how to run playbooks and processes, but comes from a design background and innovation strategy thinking. Okay, like I need it's and what flavor are you? Some are like, hey, we're all ML engineers, we're an ML studio, right? Or we're an AI studio. And like, okay, that's our thing. And so really thinking about like one, like what is your role in the first five? Because every studio is basically five. Like, okay, I'm the VC, I'm the fundraiser, I'm the business guy, I'm the business, like what is it, right? So just like any team. But your product is ideation, strategy, market research, validation, incubation, and financing. So, okay, which one of the five are you, right? There's more, but like those are the top five categories. So, okay, who are you part of the crew? Are you leading the crew? That's one thing. And the other thing is like, what do you give a shit about? Because the thing you're going to learn quickly, and this is like an Amish hypothesis. So this is like my personal why, right? Which is, can I let them go? As a person who's worked on 0 to 1 products my whole life, the hardest thing has been like, okay, time to let your baby go, and like let someone else f up the company or change this vision or whatever. And like early stuff is all vision and strategy and wouldn't the world be better if, and so that's been my career. So now, as a person who has to step back one layer and go, am I capable of creating, originating stuff? Because a lot of our ideas are just in house, right? And then we find CEOs and spin them out. Is like, am I good? Like, all right, man, you got to take this back seat, the back seat, the third row, right? Like the third row seat. Can't even be on the second row. No backseat driving.
Yeah, whisper over the shoulder. Yeah.
So, like, one is ask yourself, like, as these things grow as a portfolio, are you on your career trajectory in a place where you're rapidly able to step back and not seek control and guide and mentor? And I think there's a career wisdom and age and how many cycles have you done and how many things have you been booted out of or died and killed and all these things that help you understand how to let go, how to stay personal, but like and what does it mean to do those as the phase? Because our job is to almost originate like so some of our stuff like the world has never seen, and then 9 months later not drive it anymore. And that is hard, hard for entrepreneurs. On the flip side, it's okay, but there's a lot of people out there who want to be the CEO and come in before the company is formed, but also like you've done that work for them and they're the perfect person to go and shepherd that. And you take second seat and then go to third and then go to fourth and go to fifth. And I think that's the question I'd ask everybody in the builder space. What role do you play in that ecosystem in the first five? And what is your mindset, or being like really honest, how are you going to deal with that? Like, or when one of your portcos is 2 years in and you got to boot somebody out or it's not working out. Like, if you haven't been there, it's hard. And if you're going to be there, try to write down your answers and then a year later, see how you did. And then the year after that, see how you did. That's what I've done. I wrote down a lot of answers to personal questions of how did you fare with control and letting things go and letting someone else change the brand and like all these little things that Amish always gets like annoyed about, like, oh, the typography changed in the UI and now I'm all pissed about it. Like, I can't be, because that's not my job anymore. And I'm going to be doing Conduit for 20 years, right? Like, you're building, exactly. I think that, again, last thing on that point, if you're building a studio and a portfolio of companies you've originated, you are in this for 15 years at least.
At least, yeah.
If not more. So, like, you got to figure this stuff out. Otherwise, it's just not going to be, you can't build a platform. You can't think of it as a company and you're going to exit it. That's not how it works. Yeah, it is exactly. a company of companies, and you have to shepherd each one to try to exit the portfolio is the tactile financial thing, but also so that they're on our side and they're doing good work in the world. Like, they are good climate companies. They're great health companies. They're not more widgets we didn't need and another pair of headphones we didn't need, right? Like, so impact, return, and then mindset are going to be the big three.
I love that. Thank you for the perspective. I do have a couple flavors of considerations, and now after that answer, I'm very excited for them. What considerations do you have, or thought starters do you have for investors that are interested in the space, either from the corporate institutional side or independents that want to wet their feet as maybe not even wet their feet, but like even experienced angels that just are new to the space, right? Wet their feet in this concept of a venture studio.
Yeah,
What
I mean,
considerations do you have?
it's been a fun learning, right? Like again, like I raise for companies. I've never raised for a company creation fund,
Yep.
let alone
Yep.
a fund, right? A little bit, but like, um, I'd say on the corporate side, I think studios investing in a few studios, honestly. So if I'm, let's call it Corp X, I'm not going to name a corp, and I have you know, what does my board ask me right now? Did you ever complete that cloud digital transformation? I'm talking about normal companies, not like Google and all these, like the normal actual set of the economy. And they'll be like, hey, remember that like 10-year thing on like cloud? Did you guys actually like what happened? Does Salesforce work? Okay, cool. The board's asking these different executives. The next question is, okay, this AI thing, like, what are we doing? Right. And so there's paths here. I'm going to go hire a consultancy firm to give me a POV. That POV still means I have to go build something, and I don't have an innovation strategy. I don't have an innovation team. Okay, one is I can joint create, or I can just learn by investing in like a studio fund. Because a studio fund is going to give me access not just to there's a company and I'm a part of it and I can learn from its execution. I'm going to learn from the market research that they're doing in the built environment in ag tech. I'm going to
Yep.
basically sponsor a studio that's in my space, but so early that that's the company I might emanate 10 years from now, right? So when I
Yep.
think about that, like, okay, what's the earliest place where I can get market research, smart people ideating, I can have validated business models, talking to future customers of mine. Hey, taking a position in a ventures fund not only gets me exposure to the investable outcomes, but it gets me exposure to a team that's going to give me all the information about this stuff as an LP. And I don't know,
Yep.
Conduit, we share everything. We're very open. It's like, look, here's all the research in Notion. Go look at it. You want us to expert you a report? Like, great. Like, so our incentive is to get LPs that are industry aligned, right? So on the
Mm-hmm.
corporate side. And so
Yep.
think of it as like a strategy M&A all in one for
Yep.
very, very small ticket. So, hey, what did we learn about computer vision in the next 2 years? We need to build cutting edge. They're going to get exposure to that so fast, faster
Yep.
than and cheaper than they would have paid for otherwise. And if they want to go build something with us, they have the means to do it immediately. Not hire someone like us in house that don't want to work at that other company that's not a FANG, right? How are you going to get a Susan and a me to go there? You're not. But this is a way to do it.
Yep.
Have us do the work for you. And the second side is like angel investors, pre-seed
Yep.
investors. Um, I think it's like how do I get more shots on net, right? So
Yeah.
hey, put 250K into Conduit's company creation fund. That gets you exposure to essentially 40% ownership on, all the companies that are going to create in the portfolio. We'll probably do 10, right? In our first one. Hey, what do we offer them in advance? When those companies are ready to be birthed and we open that first safe note, guess who gets first look, first money in? You guys. So if you want to be on the preferred as well as part of your angel strategy, I'm going to present you deal flow, not only from our portfolio, but from the wider network. Right. And so,
Mm,
like, I
yep.
know that in the hard tech space, there isn't a home for hardware people and founders to come. And so I
Yep.
know that our fellows community is also going, hey, Amish, like, can we pick your brain on supply chain stuff? Like, yeah, cool. Like, use the network, whatever. Like, I'll connect to you. That's great. We should do that. But two, hey, do you have 250 allocation into your next robotics company? Cool. I'll give those to my LPs as just, here you go, man. Our community is paying it forward. So if you're
Yep.
looking to get into a sector, a studio is a good way to get exposure to what's validating and not validating in the space. So I see the due diligence actually the work. Angel investors don't
Mm,
have the time or the team to go like, okay, I'm going to put 50K or 150K check into a company, but see the due diligence from the idea, single sentence, all the way through, and then say, I'm going to put in money. So it's like, I don't know, 150K or 250K into Conduit. gets you exposure on all the work we're doing, all the research, all the
Yep.
diligence, all the tools, all the assets, everything, and an opportunity to invest on the pro rata side. Great. We'd love to have you as an LP on our preferred side because you're an LP in the studio. You guys can do that. We won't do that, but like you guys should do that, right? So,
Mm,
like, we have a few LPs that are like, great, you're going to give me 10 to 14 shots on net, and I'm going to give one check in and get all that opportunity to get it at a nice cap and a nice discount. Sure. Why not? Right. And so that's our value prop, right? Which is like, look,
yeah.
if you're looking at hardware deals and you think risk is an issue and you think we might be able to de-risk it by 20%, take 20% of your investment, put it in the company creation fund, take the rest and put it in the pro rata side. Great.
Nice. Love it. And then lastly, what about for people who want to get involved in this space? So the experts, the venture building curious and such. What advice or considerations do you have for them?
In general,
Just in general, yeah.
I think there's a few things. I think a lot of studios, I think we might start in next year, uh, like doing a venture lead, we call them, or venture builders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of in residence program, right? Like generally like associate level or someone coming in from an MBA and going, look, you learned the tools. We have our tools. Let's go work, right? Because we do one-to-one. Every CEO, every project has a venture lead on it at least 80% of their time. So it's like
Nice.
not 20 here, 20 there. It's like all in, right? And so that's one. Is like find a studio to like just go hang out with. I think every studio out there is we're very open to come hang out with us and
Yes.
go help us build a one pager and work with the founders because that's our mentality. Like
Yep.
we're looking for founders and the next founder and the next second hire and the next third hire. And like, you know, you can go down to PSL and just go work out of the space, right? And be part of the vibe in general. And I think that's what I would say is like call a studio and say, like, how do I volunteer or part-time or fractional? And like, great. I think on that side. If you're a expert or a mentor on the other hand, like, yeah, call me, right? It's like and generally like we have a Slack channel and it's like, hey, I know a guy from, you know, John Deere who's like the head of engineering and wants to be part of the community. Great. It's all
Yeah.
we're more the merrier. We don't have any of our experts sign NDAs and we share everything. Because I'm like, the only way we're going to make more high impact companies is by opening the doors, not closing them.
Yep.
And if it comes to bite me in the butt, I got to go figure that out. So I have enough protections to do that. But the reality is like, we want to be a place where founders come. And so come.
Yeah.
So, and then last to that, like because we built the infrastructure in Notion, which is every project has this workbook. This workbook has all these modules in it. It's very clean and it's very easy to use. You know, we get a lot of hardware founders who are like pre-seed, maybe seed,
Mm-hmm.
raise some capital, but man, they don't know how to get out of the POC phase. They don't know what manufacturing, like the real killer in hardware is not I can build a thing and do a pilot. It's I have no clue how GTM and scale and distribution works, and I have no clue how to finance that and execute on that. And so we offer our hardware playbook as a service. And we do
Mm-hmm.
that as like, hey, an advisory service. Like we got all these experts and stuff. Like, hey, we'll take a small advisory position and we'll help. We'll just give you access to our playbook. Or hey, do you have an early stage idea and you just want a way to flush it out? We create an instance of our playbook that if it was an internal project for them and they can just use it. We don't care. It
Nice.
helps us dial in our tools. Oh my God, they're
Yeah.
asking questions. They're doing things differently. Like let's collab. Or holy crap, let's get that guy into the studio, right? Like
Epic. Yeah.
let's get her to work on that project with us.
Yeah, exactly. Love that. Thank you, Amish. Really appreciate
Amen.
it. And how do you want people to get in touch? What's the
Uh,
best way to reach out?
yeah, I mean, Amish at conduitvl.com. That's me, AMISH, like the Amish who are not as technically inclined, but you know, we love our tech. And just write an email on there. There's an online on our website as well, a contact type form. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm going to answer those emails from 8 to 12 p.m. So send them over and, you know, say you're interested in the fellows community, if you're a hardware expert or if you're an allocator looking to get invest, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we'd love to be a partner fund and look at deals as they come out. Great. Like we're all in on building the community, however all the pieces
Nice.
come together, and just email me. I'm easy to reach.
Perfect. And we'll link all the contact information below and make it really easy to find and reach out. I haven't thought of a snazzy way to close this, but I guess one question for you: was there anything that we didn't go into? Love this conversation. I think we got into a lot um, that maybe you wanted to share or touch on, or do you have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, we talked about it a lot. I had a
Yep.
lot of coffee, so sorry. Apologies for anyone who's listening to this. It's a lot. No, I don't think anything else to add. I would say parting wise, I'm just excited about like this next phase for me personally, and then
Yep.
for us as like a network of like conduits,
Mm-hmm.
like extended network. I think the one thing I've felt from everyone, we just did Tech Week here in Seattle, and hundreds of people showed up, and like I was like, I didn't even know there were hundreds of people working on hard tech in the city, and I think like
Mm,
I think the parting word for me is like it's become more important for me and us at Conduit as a culture to steward the community. And I
yeah.
think we knew it as a
Nice.
hypothesis, but like it was a hypothesis selfish to our own risk and our own value. And I think like that has changed over the last couple of months of seeing like, okay, it's on us to do better to build more of high impact
Mm,
products and services. And I think with like climate and health and all these things, we're in the window of like, okay, if the investors are having trouble investing in it, how can we as a community make it easier for them to do it? And so like that's the mission. I think that is like the parting words here is like if you're a founder, an entrepreneur, and you want to work on that stuff, like come, we'll figure it out. If it's with us, cool. If it's with Andrew, awesome. But like let's just figure out how to make stuff that matters and the world
yeah.
needs. And I think that's like at the end of the day, that's the why, right?
Yeah. 100%. And I think the biggest thing that, like you were mentioning earlier, um, it is very community and collaboration driven, which has been phenomenal. I still remember when we had started our marketing conversations like a couple months in, started asking the questions of like, oh, who's the competition? Who should we be looking at? And I was like, all of our potential competition is potential collaborators.
Yeah.
And like you were speaking to earlier, coming together is helping us figure out what's optimal in this space and how do we really go solve these large gnarly problems, real problems that have real world impact, and how do we do so in a way that people are working together on those solutions so that we have more integrated systems and holistic solutions coming together, not that next siloed shiny tech. I love that
Yep.
you called that out earlier. um, but yeah, thank you again for an amazing conversation, for sharing, and we will definitely be checking back in with you in the next 6 months or so, just for a status update.
Yeah, man. It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, great talking to you as well.
All
All right,
right.
everyone, thank you for tuning in. Hope you have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at. And signing off. Catch you next time.
Cheers.
Peace.